At 2:14, 480 kilometers south of Iceland, the stillness of the Atlantic was broken by a dangerous acoustic signal not heard on this scale since the Cold War. A Russian Kilo-class submarine abruptly activated its active sonar and trained its torpedo systems on a U.S. vessel, signaling clear hostile intent. Confident he controlled the situation, the Russian captain had no idea that a U.S. Navy destroyer was already watching from the darkness, ready to respond in a way that could reshape the balance of power at sea in less than 90 seconds. Moscow was wagering $1 billion submarine on a bluff that Washington was fully prepared to expose. What followed was a tense shadow contest that sent a shock through the Kremlin's inner circle. To understand why America's real strength goes far beyond headlines, you have to see it for what it is. A relentless, highly disciplined system of technology and precision that leaves almost no margin for Russian miscalculation. The confrontation had actually begun weeks earlier when the Belawan, a vessel already identified by the U.S. Department of State as transporting Iranian oil tied to regional destabilization, tried to exploit a legal gap in the Caribbean. For the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard, this was never just about a single ship. It was about protecting the credibility of the global financial system and the $3.4 trillion in trade that depends on these waters being governed by international law rather than secrecy and intimidation. Desperate to keep its shadow fleet of more than 1,000 aging tankers active and generating revenue for its strained economy and military ambitions, the Kremlin made an extraordinary move. It retroactively registered the stateless vessel as a Russian sovereign asset while the operation was already underway. It was a move rooted in urgency, a legal Hail Mary meant to force US commanders into an impossible dilemma. Let the illicit oil shipment continue or risk a direct military clash with a nuclear power. For veterans watching, it has the feel of the high-pressure naval chess matches of the 1980s, only now layered with modern electronic warfare and legal manipulation. As the U.S. Coast Guard held its course despite Russian warnings, Moscow's strategy looked every bit as worn out as the tankers it was trying to shield. By deploying a submarine and surface warships to escort a civilian vessel, Russia was trying to project the image of a global navy capable of defending its interests anywhere on Earth. But from the American perspective, that image was thin, brittle, and easy to see through. Russia's northern fleet is operating under heavy strain, with tight budgets and aging assets, relying on intimidation to hide the fact that sanctions are squeezing the very economy these tankers are meant to support. The objective is straightforward: survival. Every barrel of oil that reaches port buys more time to sustain its broader campaign. Moscow appears to believe that by raising the stakes, especially by introducing a submarine, the United States will step back rather than risk a wider international crisis. That calculation depends on Western hesitation, with the Marinara effectively being used as a 600-foot shield of steel and oil. Russian state media, including RT, has gone as far as airing carefully edited footage of the pursuit to frame the U.S. Coast Guard as the aggressor against a harmless civilian ship. But that narrative falls apart the moment you examine the technical facts. The vessel's dark AIS profile and falsified registration tell a very different story. Russia is probing the perimeter, searching for weakness in the NATO line without realizing it is heading straight into an overwhelming wall of American surveillance and fire control. The gap in capability in this theater is enormous, and it begins with the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS Oscar Austin, a 9,300-ton masterpiece equipped with the Aegis combat system. While the Russian Kilo-class submarine depends on stealth to stay relevant, Oscar Austin's AN/S PY-1D phased array radar and AN/S QQ-89V-15 undersea warfare suite turn the ocean into something close to transparent. The destroyer carries the Mark 54 lightweight torpedo, built specifically to counter diesel-electric submarines in shallow water, and the RUM-139 vertical launch ASROC, which can deliver a lethal anti-submarine payload to a target area in under 90 seconds from miles away. Above the scene, a P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, the most advanced submarine hunting platform ever fielded, dropped a pattern of 32 sonobuoys, creating a digital trap the Russian commander had almost no chance of slipping through. The P-8A's Raytheon APY-10 radar is sensitive enough to pick up a submarine snorkel from miles away, even in rough seas. While Russia is leaning on late 20th century tactics, the US Navy is operating in a fully networked battlespace where sensors from the seabed to satellites are fused into one seamless detection and response chain. The Kilo's propulsion system may be quiet, but it still produces an acoustic fingerprint the US Navy has studied for decades. American analysts know the sound of its pumps, the rhythm of its propellers, and every mechanical nuance that gives it away. The turning point came at 3:45 when the Russian submarine made one last miscalculation. It surged upward in a fast ascent, clearly meant to break the surface dramatically and pressure the U.S. Coast Guard ship into backing off. But the USS Oscar Austin had already read the move before the Russian ballast tanks even started to push air. When the 4,000-ton Kilo-class submarine burst through the water like a dark whale, it surfaced directly under the watch of the destroyer's 5-inch Mark 45 naval gun and close-in defense systems, all already tracking its position. The American commander did not flinch. He did not turn away or create distance. Instead, he held course with steady precision, moving at 18 knots less than 500 yards from the weathered hull of the Marinara and the wet black steel of the submarine beside it. Inside the Combat Information Center, the mood remained controlled and disciplined, the complete opposite of the urgent Russian radio traffic demanding that the United States stop what they called an unlawful pursuit. The Americans never needed to open fire. Their message was delivered another way, by showing that they controlled every layer of the environment around them. Then the balance shifted even further. When the USS Donald Cook appeared on the horizon, the Russian surface escorts understood immediately that the numbers no longer worked in their favor. The so-called black hole of the fleet was now stuck on the surface, stripped of stealth and robbed of its main advantage simply by the presence of a more prepared and more capable opponent. In that moment, the Russian captain knew the mission was slipping away. One look through the periscope at the American flag, snapping in the Atlantic wind, said everything. What followed left the Kremlin facing embarrassment and a serious blow to its image. State media could try to frame the encounter as a successful defense of a civilian ship, but naval professionals around the world saw something very different. A Russian submarine had been forced into full view and photographed by the same ships it had been sent to intimidate. The Marinara, whatever name or flag it now carries, remains a vessel under constant scrutiny, its movements watched around the clock by NATO as it crawls toward the North Sea. The wider danger surrounding these Shadow Fleet tankers remains impossible to ignore. Many of them are more than 15 years old, poorly maintained, and thinly insured, creating a serious environmental and commercial risk wherever they sail. But Washington's message in this episode was unmistakable. A vessel's legal status cannot simply be invented in the middle of an operation to dodge international rules. With other tankers already seized, the broader pressure campaign is still holding. Russia's attempt to raise the stakes has only triggered a stronger Western response. More American assets have moved into the region, including F-35s now based in Northern Europe to reinforce air cover and deterrence. The direct financial cost of this failed escort operation may run into the millions, but the reputational damage, especially in front of Russia's partners, is far harder to measure. Moscow showed its hand, and the US Navy answered with overwhelming confidence. The lesson from this standoff is bigger than one confrontation at sea. In the modern era, speed of information and the discipline of a trained crew can matter more than any single platform or weapon. Moscow was reminded in costly fashion that pressure without control has limits. It tried to use an aging tanker as a piece in a larger geopolitical contest, but it ran into a navy that has spent generations refining how to keep sea lanes open and enforce the rules that govern them. The message is clear. Never enter a technological contest against an opponent that has already shaped the battlefield and mastered the systems that define it. The oceans are controlled not by those who hide behind false flags and improvise narratives, but by those who operate with precision, patience, and total awareness. Looking at the empty deck of the Marinara and the fading trail of a submarine forced into retreat, the moment serves as a reminder that security depends on constant vigilance and the cold discipline of those who stand watch. At first light, as the gray haze over the North Atlantic began to lift, the scene became even more revealing. The Marinara, with peeling paint and black smoke spilling from tired engines, looked like a relic from another era beside the sharp, modern silhouette of the USS Oscar Austin. The American crew, many from families with deep naval traditions reaching back to the Atlantic campaigns of World War II, moved with the calm efficiency that only comes from thousands of hours of training. They were more than sailors in that moment. They represented the living expression of national resolve. When the Russian Kilo-class submarine finally slipped back underwater, it did so under the close attention of sonar teams inside Oscar Austin's combat center, following every movement with extraordinary detail. Every turn, every depth change, every adjustment was monitored and passed back in real time to Norfolk and the Pentagon. Russia's attempt at Maskirovka, deception and misdirection, had failed because in the modern era, the deep ocean offers fewer and fewer hiding places to those facing advanced surveillance and network detection. This incident also underscored the growing coordination between the United States and its North Atlantic allies. While Oscar Austin led the visible response, British Merlin helicopters and French frigates were part of the broader tracking network across the region. That may be what worries the Kremlin most, not just American power alone, but the combined strength of an alliance sharing data, tactics, and a common strategic purpose. The Shadow Fleet is not only a Russian issue, it is a broader threat to maritime safety and economic stability worldwide. These older tankers, often moving without proper insurance or reliable maintenance, pose a serious hazard to every coastline and shipping lane they pass. By stopping the Marinara, the U.S. Navy was doing more than enforcing sanctions. It was sending a signal that the rules governing the sea still matter, and that attempts to bypass them will not go unanswered. It was also about protecting the oceans themselves and the livelihoods of millions who depend on clean and stable maritime routes. The measured restraint shown by American commanders, even with a surfaced submarine only moments away, reflects the disciplined approach that defines the U.S. military. The objective is never unnecessary confrontation, but the capability to resolve a situation decisively if required is always there. Looking forward, Moscow's risky tactics may continue as its strategic options become more limited. Yet each attempt like this also gives the United States and NATO valuable insight into Russian procedures and technology. Every sonar pulse, every radio exchange, and every maneuver made by the escorting forces was captured and analyzed by advanced American electronic systems. In trying to project strength, Moscow unintentionally revealed more about its own limitations. Whether the Marinara eventually reaches its destination or is forced to turn back is almost secondary now. The real outcome of this episode has already unfolded. The attempt to operate in the shadows was illuminated by the overwhelming transparency created by modern American naval technology. The broader message is simple and widely understood. The international maritime order will be defended, and those who attempt to undermine it through secrecy and intimidation may find themselves in the same position as that Russian submarine. Visible, outmatched, and compelled to withdraw. This is the reality of modern sea power. As long as the United States Navy remains on watch, guarding the world's critical waterways, that reality is unlikely to change. When the ships finally separated, the USS Oscar Austin turned back toward its patrol sector, its crew already preparing for the next possible contact. For them, it was simply another assignment, another day maintaining stability through readiness. For the rest of the world, however, the moment carried a deeper meaning. The ocean remains the ultimate arena of global influence. Systems like Aegis, the quiet precision of the P-8A Poseidon, and the steady composure of trained American sailors form a barrier that helps maintain order in some of the most contested waters on Earth. The Russian tanker Marinara may continue its voyage for now, but the encounter surrounding it will remain a clear example of what can happen when confidence collides with preparation. For those who understand the responsibilities carried by a naval commander, this event was a textbook example of maritime diplomacy and operational discipline. We will continue watching developments like this across the globe, examining the technical details and strategic realities that shape events at sea. The Shadow Fleet may be expanding, but the reach of the United States Navy continues to stretch across the world's oceans. Thank you for your interest in maritime security and global stability. Stay aware, stay informed, and remember that professionalism and precision are what matter most when operating in environments as unforgiving as the North Atlantic. If you'd like, I can also break down the specific electronic warfare systems on the USS Donald Cook and explain how they likely contributed to the monitoring and control of this standoff.